Super. No, we'll get started on this very interesting topic of the secret sauce of brand building. I think firstly, a very warm welcome to the audience and to the terrific group of panelists here. I think it's a very interesting time to talk about brand building today, right? I think if we look at the past 3 or 4 years, I think the influx of brands, right, in the country has been sort of quite tremendous, right? At last count, over the last 3 years, there have been anywhere close to 500 plus D2C brands that have launched, right? And obviously not everyone has survived, but 500 plus brands launching in the country in a very short span of time, everyone trying to build their own brand, right? It's also not only D2C brands. I think this year itself, there are about 50 global brands that are going to launch in India, right? So it's a time like no other. And therefore, this question of how do you build a brand and how do you create a competitive advantage out of it is very, very pertinent. So with that, I think let's get into the discussion that we have, right? I think, and maybe the first place to start is, I think if we think about the time right now and this whole fragmentation that's happening, both on the brand side, but also on consumers' attention, right? Like if we think back 4, 5, 10 years, right? Brand building used to be on the TV, it used to be in the newspapers, then came along digital, and now if we even think about digital, it's consumers' attention is super fragmented, right? And so a question, a little bit of a, I would say, provocative thought, right? Is there still a value to building a brand, right? Or are you, I think in the previous session when we entered, they were talking about search, right? And search is pretty much where a lot of the transactions are happening. So do you still build a brand, or are you only as good as your next search, right? And maybe, Prashant, if you want to start with that first one, given that you're building so many new brands.
Yeah, sure. So maybe quickly I'll introduce Tomorrow briefly, and then I'll get into the question. So as Tomorrow, we are in the business of building digital-first brands, a large house of brands entity that focuses on fashion lifestyle. Our fundamental belief has been that a lot of insurgent brands will continue to disrupt the traditional incumbent brands. But more than the channel, whether it's D2C, marketplace, or offline, what we believe is that these are new age brands solving problems for new age consumers. So fundamentally, when you think about new age consumers, that's where I think, Nikhil, your question on attention spans being low to the way brands have been built with a predominant focus on performance marketing seems like the secret sauce. But I think for us, when we started Tomorrow, our belief from day zero has been about brand building and not about aggregating multiple brands and doing the right performance marketing hacks. And we believe that with shorter attention spans, it's even more important for you to build a brand. In some ways, if you have to build a long-term sustainable business which is enduring and eventually becomes an iconic brand, you have to get to that point where loyalty and retention-led growth is fundamentally where brands get built. And for you to get there, of course, you have to start with something unique in terms of the consumer value prop and the problem you're solving. But more importantly, with younger Gen Z millennial consumers, the brand has to transcend beyond the products you're selling. There has to be an association which is much larger than the product you're selling. We just saw the Urbanic video before this. For Urbanic to be a fast fashion brand, it's not enough to just have the best products and the best trends out there. It's actually important to associate with the consumer far more deeply, from an emotional connect to building a consumer community. And a lot of brands that we see today, which are born on Instagram, to born on Myntra, to born on Shopify, eventually get to scale when they build a large consumer community. And for you to get there, I think we believe that brand building is the only way to do it, and getting the balance right between short-term performance marketing, which is to solve this month's and this quarter's growth, versus longer-term enduring brand building. That's at least our point of view.
Thank you, Prasad. That's terrific. So there you have it, folks. I think brand building is still going to be very key. And I think given the mix of the panel, I think we have quite a few folks who also run marketplaces. So just building on that question, right, is that when you look at it from a marketplace perspective, right, like how do you see this playing out? Like, do you see brand loyalties being built over time with this approach of brand building? And which are the brands that are maybe at the forefront of it, right? I think that would be terrific to hear. So maybe Rajat and Ashish, I think if you both want to take that question, since you both sort of run multi-brand marketplaces.
So Dealshare is basically a grocery and essentials platform for mass market India, and we happen to work with 1,000 plus small and regional brands. We have our own array of 8 brands of private labels that we have. So I think from that perspective and with that context, I can say that brand building has two aspects to it, right? Like I think one is obviously like getting customers' attention and getting them to try your product. The other and more important part of it is retention, which is basically translating into whether they are satisfied with your product, with your service or not. So that the users come back again and again on the platform and are able to basically engage with your brand in a more effective way. So while, yeah, I mean, I think I'm just like responding to the previous question to Ashish. I think the important thing in overall brand building is that, like, while it may be easy to get a customer with all the technology and with all the social media to get to the customers, but I think it boils down to ultimately the quality equation, like what kind of quality of product you are creating, what is your brand ethos in the long run, like whether people associate with your brand or not, whether they associate with the mission behind your brand. And also, like, as a result of good service and all, like, do they want to come back to your brand? A part also that plays into it is how do you create engagement, right? Like, I think while, like, you can, like, engage them once, but how do you engage them sustainably? How do you use data, technology, gamification, and social to basically get users back to use your product and brand again and again? I think those are some of the things which allow you to build a sustainable brand, where brand building invests in business building and business building invest in brand building. So, like, coming back to Dealshare, I think we have been able to work with a lot of these brands from regional, like these regional brands, and take them to rest of the country and make them successful with us. So the right associations with right kind of platforms and engagement eventually adds more value than just acquiring customers and one time.
Maybe I'll just provide a slightly different perspective. I'm one of the co-founders of Jumbotail. We're India's leading wholesale food and grocery and new retail platform. So we operate a B2B marketplace for mom and pop retailers, kirana stores, to procure products that they sell in their stores, about 250,000 retailers on the platform. And then we operate a business which takes the best retailers in that network and helps them sell more effectively by turning their stores into omni-channel convenience grocery stores. So selling both consumer-facing through the retail network that we empower, and then also the connecting about 2,000 brands to about 250,000 retailers. I think just a few things on this, right? One, that question actually varies quite significantly from category to category. So if we're, I'm going to give it in the context of food and grocery. We do both staples as well as FMCG. A lot of very commoditized categories actually, essentially become very feature-led in some ways. So if it's very difficult to build brands in categories like rice, pulses, etc. And that's one of the reasons why very few people have succeeded. However, if you do succeed, you actually get a massive benefit. But if you look at, say search queries, let's just to maybe give you a more tangible sense, right? Search queries on our platform. A lot of retailers come to the platform and say, basmati rice, 70 rupees, 75 rupees. They're not looking for a brand. And therefore, in that case, in many cases, it's really about what attributes you're providing and are you actually providing value for money, etc. But there are also then retailers similarly coming and basically looking at two of the largest brands that exist, two of the few brands, Dawat and India Gate, right? So if you build a brand, you're actually going to see a lot of value, because then retailers will come to you and you actually step outside of the clutter. But building that will require a few things, right? I think a lot of people talk about mental availability, which is where you're doing, brand recall, etc. But I think especially in categories like food and grocery, physical availability is extremely important. And so one of the biggest things, we've built, a multi-100 crore, in-house brand in the staple space, just with zero marketing. It's just availability in store consistently over a period of time, providing quality, and over a period of time, consumers start recognizing this. So there are ways to build this, but I think one unexplored factor a lot of times is really physical availability. How many stores are you actually available in, especially in categories like grocery, where the vast majority of consumers are spending the vast majority of their time inside stores.
Thank you, Ashish and Rajat. I think grocery obviously is one of the largest categories in the country, so it's terrific to hear about brand building in that context. Now, I think sort of stretching that further, right? Obviously, young brands, right, find it very difficult to cut through clutter, right? And even if you take a category like grocery, you have the behemoths, right? But if we think about young brands, right, I think one of the questions that keeps coming up is how do you cut through the clutter, through the fragmentation and things like that, right? And how do you not box yourself into a very niche TAM, right? And I think it'll be lovely to hear from you, right, in terms of, Pankaj, in terms of, like, obviously Etsy globally is known very well, and India is going to be a new market for you. So both as the platform and as brands that sell on the platform, even small sort of creators, how would you think about cutting through the clutter, and how would you advise young brands to build their own brand?
Hello. Yeah. Hi. Thanks. So I'll just take cue from the others and introduce Etsy. Right. So Etsy is a global marketplace for handmade products primarily. So it's a place where creators create handmade products and buyers come and buy from them. It's one platform globally. It's also available in India. You can buy in Indian rupees from creators across the world, including India. Right, so to kind of get back to your question on that. So Etsy as a marketplace sells primarily unbranded stuff. Right? By definition, it's creators who are creating, artisans who are making something of their own and selling. So many of them don't have brands as such. It's they are the brand, right? And in that context, that's what a marketplace brings to such a creator base or any seller base, where the marketplace becomes the brand, right? And all the attributes of trust, of quality, etc., that a brand needs, that's what the marketplace provides. And then creators and sellers can ride on those brand attributes to build their own sub-brands within the marketplace, right? So that's how I see that happening, where that's what a marketplace will bring forward. Marketplace will create that trust, that brand name, and on the back of which sellers can then ride and create their own sub-brands and products, right? But having said that, all marketplaces by definition are also crowded. And how do you differentiate yourself when there are millions of others selling similar kind of products? And there it goes to the same attributes we've spoken of, which is quality, which is creating something unique and different, right? And it also changes with time. So something that was clutter breaking a few years ago need not be clutter breaking anymore, right? The moment you do something, there's a lot of other people who will get inspired by that and do something similar or near to it, and you will need to keep moving on. And that will have to be part of your brand ethos, right? You define what you are. So it's not just the product attributes, you will need to define your brand ethos beyond the product attributes, and then keep innovating as you build a brand, right? It's not an easy journey, it's not a short journey. It will take time and effort, but it's possible, right? And it doesn't necessarily always take mega bucks, right? You can build brands over time with consistent effort, consistent quality. And that's the beauty of e-commerce marketplaces, where they've solved a bunch of other problems that you would have had pre-e-commerce, right? You don't have to worry about distribution. You don't have to worry about location. The platform takes care of it. You just have to worry about representing yourself in the best possible way and creating unique products which buyers will like to buy from you. And that's how you build a relationship with buyers. And that's what endures to build a brand in the long term.
Yeah, I think just building on this point, if you look at our portfolio, there are brands which have been born purely on the D2C side. So a brand like, let's say, Bewakoof, which has been one of the OGs of expressive casual wear. They built their brand on D2C, and now they're starting to scale on marketplaces. While there are some brands in our portfolio where they were born on the marketplace side, they didn't really invest ahead of the curve in building a brand. They sort of like you've been saying, ride on the brand recall that the marketplace has, build trust and credibility through that. And over time, build your own, direct-to-consumer channels. So I think there's no right path. I think a lot of brands in India, if you think about it, have been built irrespective of which channel you were born in. I think the important part is how do you engage the consumer? I think the point you made. If I look at Bewakoof, a lot of the Bewakoof engagement on Instagram to D2C and now on Myntra, Flipkart, etc., is largely about expression and expression leading to connection. It's no longer just about the product you're selling. It's about me engaging with you on a daily basis and starting to engage with the community. And once that is established, the repeat and the retention starts to kick in. And this is a brand which has almost 70% repeat. In fact, they don't even need to burn as much money in acquiring new customers. And some of the new customers today may come from marketplace trials, may come from D2C experimentation for the first time, or in some cases selectively offline, right? So for us, channel is a means to an end. I think what matters is, are you able to engage the consumer? Are you able to build loyalty? And are you finding hooks for them to come back and talk to you beyond the product you're selling? And sometimes I think for the Gen Z, millennial consumers, what we've seen is the brand purpose and the brand cause is as important as the product you're selling. While price and discounting and product price equation is always important, but eventually if you take something like a Patagonia globally, right? People buy Patagonia not just because it's a great brand and a great product. It's because the cause that the brand believes in is a strong association hook. And we're starting to see signs of that in India as well. I think once you build the foundation, irrespective of which channel, can you then build a deeper emotional connect, stronger engagement, and then the flywheels will start to kick in.
Thank you, Prashant. And maybe just building on that, right? I think you both spoke about, yes, there is a role for marketplaces to play in brand building, and we'll circle back to that. I think the one interesting thing that you also spoke about is it's not just marketing or advertising that builds the brand, right? How does that translate into day-to-day operations, right? Because a brand is not just advertising, it's also the way that you do things. So how do you guys think about that? And sort of open to any of you who want to take that question. Brands beyond advertising, what does that really mean?
Yeah, I think in our industry, like you said, I think it varies a lot by category, but in fashion, I think it starts with the product differentiation. So a lot of our thinking on brand beyond the consumer value prop and the consumer insight starts with, is the product itself differentiated? And for that sort of thesis, I think the most important part for a Gen Z, millennial, digitally savvy consumer is, are you spotting the trend fast enough? And are you rapidly experimenting? Are you testing and learning what the consumer would like rather than assume that you know the answer? And once you start to put out more styles, more designs out there, the consumer will tell you exactly what they want. And the moment you find your bestseller, the fastest moving style, then automatically the brand gets known on the back of bestsellers, as opposed to you having to communicate harder on what the brand is all about. So for us, it starts with that. And then post that, I think it boils down to a little bit of who is the TG and what do they care about. I think, again, taking the Bewakoof example as one of the brands in our portfolio, what we've seen as a unique insight with Gen Z consumers is, in today's world, I think building connection has become that much harder. While we believe that connection is easier to build on Instagram, in reality, I think the physical connections have become that much harder, and the digital connections are that much more superficial. So the brand, in some ways, is solving a problem statement of expression, leading to connection, and that one unique insight helped us, penetrate that market more deeply. So that again is another hook of how do you think about consumer insight to product innovation, and then of course, communication and marketing has to align with that promise and that storytelling.
Terrific. And we heard I would say a product brand point of view. I think what would also be very helpful to hear is how marketplaces think about brand building, right? They're, again, just beyond advertising, right? And Etsy is a marketplace, Jumbotail to a certain extent marketplace, Dealshare, right? So maybe Pankaj, if you want to get us started and then,
Sure.
Yeah.
So Etsy, again, is slightly unique in terms of marketplaces because it's largely individual creators, right? 90% of sellers on Etsy are a business of one person. So their investment is very much in product innovation over brand building typically, and their brands would be local to Etsy many times. We find that creators, once they grow to a certain size, they tend to prefer still focusing on creating unique products rather than kind of focusing on the marketing aspect of brands, right? And they of course use the options that the platform provides to build their brands within the aegis of the marketplace. So, but having said that, I think the effort that a new brand needs to make is very much what Prashant was saying, right? You build that connection with customers, not just on the product attributes, but find something beyond the product, right? Find something that the customer likes and stands for. And in that sense, Etsy as a marketplace has done that with building its brand, right? Sustainability is one aspect of it. But the most important part that helps Etsy build a brand is the human connection, right? So our kind of mission statement is to keep commerce human. And that's what we kind of swing everything on, right? Where it's probably the only marketplace where a buyer and a seller talk to each other directly, right? So that helps build that connection. It helps grow the brand beyond just that product attribute, where there are beautiful stories born, where buyers write saying there was a special occasion for which this seller went out of his way to create something for me, right? And that story is what becomes far more important than the product that they purchased. And that story is what brings them back to the marketplace. It will bring them back to that seller, to that brand, and to the marketplace. So creating unique products and building stories, building connections beyond the product attributes around that, that is probably what will help you in the longer term to build a brand.
I think there's two elements, and again, many of you guys are running direct to consumer marketplaces. Our marketplace is actually selling to retailers, and so the brand building journey. I think there's a few things I'd mention, right? One is there has to be brand marketplace fit as well, right? If you're going after a typical consumer, if you're listing on a marketplace like Jumbotail, we are a mass market, Kirana focused marketplace, right? So if you're a brand that actually isn't targeting consumers that are walking into Kirana stores, the good news is the vast majority of consumers in this country walk into Kirana stores. But if you're a brand that's exclusively focused at people who don't necessarily frequent Kirana stores, you're probably not going to do well on the marketplace, right? So one is, what does the marketplace brand stand for? The marketplace brand, at least at Jumbotail, stands for convenience, reliability, trust, basic, day-to-day, enablement of the retailer to procure the widest possible selection. If you're not consistent with that as a brand, you're not going to do well. The second is, to your earlier question, we're sharing mics, so I'm going to take the liberty of actually answering that question. I think even marketplaces, therefore, themselves need to orient their structures, their operations, the way that they're built to actually first be consistent with the brand that they stand for, which is, if you're convenient, reliable, and trustworthy, then you have to build a supply chain that actually guarantees next day delivery, 97-98% fill rate, right? High in stock. If you don't have that, you're not going to have retailers come to you. Second is, I think, just looking at, I think for the first time in history, we have the opportunity to look at channels in a slightly different way, right? So for example, typically, if you look at FMCG companies in this country, they've looked at retailers as, I will drive consumers into this retailer, he has the product, it will automatically sell. And they don't really put a lot of effort into actually informing and branding to the retailer themselves. Because the channel that you were going through was a distributor, salesperson, or wholesale, where you did not have the ability to communicate a high fidelity message, right? You're basically playing Chinese whispers with 4 or 5 layers of people, and at the end of the day, the message that you carefully crafted at headquarters is not necessarily being conveyed to the retailer, and therefore not necessarily being conveyed at the point of purchase to the consumer. There is an opportunity now, at least our view of what we stand for, not only is a high trust transaction platform, but also a mechanism by which you can actually reach out to retailers who are an integral community in informing buying decisions at the point of purchase with video, with a whole bunch of targeted messaging, which are targeted not only at what the consumer value prop is, but also what the retailer should actually tell the consumer when the consumer walks in. And I think that's an interesting opportunity to really look at brand building in a B2B2C construct very, very differently.
I think all those are very valid points, and I think the brand marketplace fit is a very important aspect of the whole thing. I think, but I'll just add some more points, which are some pertaining to marketplace and some like in general. I think one is obviously the brand promise. Like every brand starts with a promise, and that promise is superly important for whosoever is creating that brand, and that promise has to be followed through till the life cycle of association of the customers with that brand, and whether it's a marketplace or not, or otherwise, I think whether it is your brand stands for certain physical attributes of quality or price or value, right? Or it stands for some emotional connect, whatever it is, right? The experience needs to be followed through entire journey and all the touch points. And if the marketplace follows that ethos of your brand, I think that's a good product brand and marketplace fit. The second theme I wanted to touch upon is segmentation, right? Like I think technology and all the data that we have today allows you to create a segment of even one user, right? It's a bit unfortunate that manufacturing cannot speed up to that point of personalizing products for each customer and doing that, but I think we will eventually get there. So segmenting customers to a smaller groups using technology, marketplaces, their data, and reaching out and creating and targeting those niches is a very important aspect, which is like now opening up, right? Which was as a ability was not there earlier. Today it is there. The third is context. I think Ashish touched upon the omni-channel point. I think eventually, if you observe a lot of brands, they have like last 20 years, they all like bunch of them started online moved offline, because I think the context is very important, right? Like you can buy a kirana from a kirana wala from online, from like 30-minute delivery. Like there are different contexts for different kind of delivery, right? So having that context added to your offering, and what does it translate into from promise perspective? I think having those three dimensions and putting them forward in the context or without context of a marketplace, I think that will help.
No, that's a great segue into the next question. And firstly, thank you to the panel to talk about the ethos of brand building. Now, I think getting down into the brass tacks of it, and segmentation is a great segue, right? I think one of the most hotly debated questions is performance versus branding when you think about brand building. Right? And I think with the advent of digital marketing, the ability to segment users at an equal to one level, and also the whole boom in e-commerce advertising, right? Like one of the hotly contested questions even we at McKinsey debate with our clients is, hey, should you invest more in performance marketing, get that next dollar of revenue through the door in the next quarter, or should you think about building your longer term brand? I think that's a question top of everyone's mind, so would love to hear your thoughts about it. Maybe we can go around the room, maybe Prashant, if you want to start.
Yeah, sure. So I think, having seen the other side at Meta in terms of what ad products and what, advertising focus that, Google, Facebook, Instagram, etc. have pushed, often what I've seen is brands fall in the trap of short-term orientation, which is performance marketing at the cost of brand marketing. And we've seen many examples where brands which have invested early in brand marketing, eventually they've gone on to become leadership brands, versus brands which purely did performance marketing, because it's easy to do that day in, day out, week in, week out, solve for ROAS, solve for TACoS, all the ad spend metrics that one would track and feel good about. And in many ways also, whether you raise VC funding or whether you're bootstrapped or whether you're going through a different path, capital is always a constraint. And in some ways, you're solving for delivering short-term metrics. And hence, again, there's a reason to believe that capital efficiency and return on investment would be much easier if you spent money only on performance marketing. But in our thesis, at least at Tomorrow, what we believe is that you have to get that balance right. And some brands I've seen even spending as much as 40% of overall ad dollars into brand in the early years. And outside of our portfolio, I think brands like Mamaearth or Boat did that. It didn't matter whether they were born on marketplace or D2C. In the very first couple of years, they started to build that. And then today you see the success of that after 4, 5 years or 7 years, where they're literally miles ahead of anybody else in the category. So I think we fundamentally believe that don't fall in the trap of short-term orientation. Don't fall for the ROAS metrics that one would make you feel like you're doing well. Eventually, I think the whole loyalty, retention versus repeat, or CAC for existing versus new, or in general performance versus brand, you will run into a treadmill where it's a slippery slope and you will fundamentally go south. And eventually budgets will be thin and you will never have the chance to ever spend money on brand. So that's, I think, our view.
Sure, I can take a crack, and I largely agree with what you're saying, right? But I also don't think it's an either or question, it's an and, right? So you cannot afford to not do brand building, you cannot afford to not do performance spending either, right? You need that short-term kind of boost of adrenaline of daily orders, etc. But in the longer term, if you want to bring your CAC down, there is no alternative but to build a brand, right? You need to start getting direct traffic. You need to have people recognizing your brand for what it is and coming directly to buy from you, not necessarily going through Google or anywhere else, right? So it's a question of doing both. It's also a question of timing. So there will be a point of time when you will need to do more performance, less brand maybe. And as your time changes in the market, the amount of time you've spent, your recognition goes up, you can change that model. And it also varies a little bit what your competition is doing, right? You cannot ignore how the competition is playing the market, and you will need to respond to that as well. But like you said, longer term, you need to build a brand. There is very little other alternatives to building a brand and growing your presence in the market organically.
There's a book I really, I think there's a book called How Brands Grow by Byron Sharp. I don't know how many of you read it. If you haven't, I'd highly recommend. No skin in game here, but I actually really enjoyed reading that book. And I think one of the interesting points that they mentioned in that book was, the vast majority of your customers are going to be very infrequent customers. And so, if you don't actually do mass marketing and you only do performance marketing and you only end up focusing on, customers that you think are your customers, you're losing a massive opportunity to actually increase your base over a period of time. And all brands do need to do that. Now, obviously, there are all the challenges associated with, thinking long term in an environment where everyday metrics must be moving up and, up in a J curve upwards. But I think there's a lot of value in thinking about that. But obviously, you have to, approach it with a much longer term mindset than how did it drive sales tomorrow.
Super. I know we are almost at time, so maybe just one last question building on all of that, right? I think is how has the role of the CMO changed, right? I think we spoke a lot about how brands influence what you are doing in the market. Historically, marketing used to be, and I'm going to get pushback for this, but used to be a little bit of a black box activity, right? You put money in and then there were all kinds of models saying, hey, this is what came out, right? Now with digital marketing, it's very clear what you put in, what comes out, etc. So, and you have folks like the board founder who's actually the CMO of the company and not the CEO of the company. So in your eyes, how has the role of the CMO changed? And Rajat, if you want to kick us off on this one.
Sure. So I feel that one of the things that has changed is that the feedback that you do get on your efforts is very fast and very clear, right? So there's a lot of clarity in what you are doing, and I mean that's good side and that's bad side to it, right? Like obviously, like previously there was a lot of gap between, like there was a lot of subjectivity and gap between your action and reaction. Today with the whole performance marketing background, the feedback mechanisms are pretty quick. It is slightly more impersonal and data-oriented activity, reaching out to customers and getting your message across. Creativity is still something which, hopefully, like with ChatGPT background and all those, like like that creativity is still something which you can have to attract the customers and get your message across. But I think the role by and large has become a lot more, you can say, data-oriented, more digital, and the role of digital marketing, etc., has definitely gone up.
I think we are at time. So with that, I think we'll wrap up the discussion. Firstly, a big thank you to the panelists. I hope it was a useful session to the audience. I think we learned about brand building. We learned that it's still very important to build a brand. We did learn that yes, there is a very important role that marketplaces play, especially in today's day and age. But there is stuff that you need to do as a brand to connect directly, right? Yes, you can invest in short-term performance through performance marketing, but it's the longer-term brand building that pulls you through eventually, right? And you need to sort of hit the clutch and the accelerator accordingly. Right, and lastly, obviously, I think we spoke about what is the realm of the possibility. I think we obviously, it's hard to get by without hearing ChatGPT in any discussions these days. So I think there is the advent of Gen AI, but even before that, I think obviously with Facebook, with Google, and with all the e-commerce places coming in, I think the segmentation that you can do, right? And I think somebody said it's hard to manufacture at an n equal to 1 level. People in Etsy are probably doing that. So I think both at the advertising and the creating the product level, there is tremendous, I would say, opportunity to personalize, right? Yeah, I think with that, we can call it.